And we're live. Woohoo!
Hi, Tim. Hi, Orna. How are you?
Hi, Christelle. Hi, Tim. Hello, everyone.
And today's guest is the amazing Orna Ross, who is a poet, writer, author, supremo of the Alliance of Independent Authors, which I must admit I do a little bit of work for. So that's a caveat to anybody who's like conflict of interest. So have to be nice to Orna today. But
I'll make a change.
Normally, every discussion, I mean, I've done live shows with Orna for the Alliance of Independent Authors before, but normally the discussion always starts with self-publishing. So for once, let's talk about your poetry and how you got started in poetry. And then maybe later on, if we've got some time, we've only got half an hour, we can talk about self-publishing. But let's talk about the poetry side. How did you get started in poetry? And what made you think, oh, maybe this is something you should do?
Yeah, well, I mean, poetry started me, if you know what I mean. It just came through me when I was a teenager full of angst and locked up in a convent. So, you know, there wasn't a lot of, yeah, exactly, Irish boarding school. So there wasn't a lot of things to do. And, you know, I was very, the way you are at that age, and I just poured out. I fell in love with Yeats' poetry as a very young person, right? About 10 years of age or something. And so I used to pour out this, you know, sub-Yeatsian verse and had a great old time feeling terrible. And then I just stopped. And I think that's very typical. I think a lot of people do write poetry when they're younger, and then kind of the world takes over and you leave it behind. The next time I started to write poetry was when I lost a very dear friend in my early 40s. And I just found that the only thing, again, that gave me the same sort of comfort that it did when I was a teenager was poetry. And this time I didn't stop. So I just kept on writing poems. And then they moved from that sort of angst-filled, woe is me sort of stuff. I started taking in a much wider range of subjects. And then I got interested in poetry for, you know, in terms of form and shape and things like sonnets and, you know, almost like a challenge where I would set myself challenges, but it was all private. I didn't think about publishing it. I had no great interest in publishing it. I published fiction, and I worked as a journalist and a writing teacher at that time, but poetry was very personal and very private. And then I was having creative differences with my fiction publisher, and self-publishing had kind of emerged. And I was thinking about self-publishing. I was extremely skeptical. I didn't think I would be right for self-publishing. I thought it would be the technical stuff would defeat me. And you know, the classic thing, I just want to write. I want other people to take care of all that other stuff. But I couldn't ignore what all my author friends were saying, which was that they were having the time of their lives creatively and making a lot of money. So I thought, well, you know, I put 10 of these poems together into a little pamphlet and just make a tiny, tiny book, that, you know, just make it all as easy as possible. I thought poetry would be a very easy way. I also thought, I'll make a mess of this and nobody reads poetry, so it won't matter. Nobody's going to buy it anyway. So I went through the process. I put it up on Amazon, and lo and behold, people did buy it, which I really honestly shocked me profoundly. And some lovely engagement started with some of the readers. And then that led me into, I published a non-fiction book next. Then I got my fiction rights back from my publisher, and then founded the Alliance of Independent Authors. So it's all down to poetry, really.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell us a bit about your poetry. What was your inspiration behind your poetry? What is your primary subject matter?
Well, now you know the way you have to in the self-publishing world, well, the publishing world generally, you have to categorize yourself. So the category that I find myself in most often is inspirational, not religious, spiritual, creative inspiration, that sort of end of things. But honestly, what I love about poetry is that you can write about absolutely anything, and you can write about it in different sort of ways. That's one of the things I love most about it. So I don't, when it comes to poetry, I don't confine myself. I do when it comes to publishing it, but not when it comes to writing it. So about a year and a half ago, maybe now, or maybe even longer, the years have gone so fast, I started putting poetry onto Instagram, and that has been fantastic. So they're just little short things, sometimes with a photograph accompaniment. And then I started Indie Poetry Please, which invites other poets to submit their poems on Instagram using that hashtag. And I select some of those and do readings of those sometimes. So the whole little world has kind of grown up around the poetry, and it's a very, very vibrant genre on Instagram. And I think what surprised me initially, and what totally surprises people who are not aware of it, is that poets are doing extremely well in self-publishing commercially as well as creatively. So everybody has this kind of impression that you can't make money writing poetry, but there are some poets who absolutely are and can. And, you know, year on year, I'm selling more poetry books all the time. And it is as possible in poetry to establish a self-publishing plan and everything as it is with any other genre. Poetry is actually a big umbrella term. It breaks down into lots of different genres, just like fiction does and just like non-fiction does. So poets are very different in how they approach their work. But for me, I tend to be very eclectic, and it can be kind of all over the place. So my most recent book is a book of mindfulness poetry, and my next book, which is coming shortly, is a book of love poetry. Hopefully will be out for Valentine's Day. So it really can be anything.
Wow. Now, how do you get your covers designed? And do you include pictures inside your poetry books? How does this all work?
Yeah, so I haven't gone the picture route. I keep it very simple. It's just about the words. I format and go through the exact same self-publishing routine for my poetry as I do for my fiction and nonfiction. So I work with the same designer for all my books. That's the wonderful, shout out here, Jane Dixon-Smith. I've worked with Jane since I self-published that very first poetry book, and we're still together nearly 10 years later. So we'll kind of I'll have a concept and I'll bring it to Jane and we'll kind of thrash it out, and she'll come up with something. And, I love the cover process. I love working with her on that, and how, it starts off as a vague idea, and what she always brings a bit of magic into it. And then I just, again, go for a very simple formatting. So I don't write the kind of poems that, go all over the place or make shapes on a page or anything like that. So no fancy typescript is necessary for the kind of poetry that I've published so far. So I just use vellum, as I do for my other books, and to put the interior together. And vellum gives me both the ebook and the print book in all sorts of sizes and things. So I do a hardback and a paperback and a large print, and I do the full sort of range. What I haven't done yet, and what's down for this year, is audiobooks. So I want to get them all up, and I will narrate those myself, and hopefully maybe even produce them myself as well. So that's a new adventure for this year.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I said I'd talk about poetry for a while. To be fair, it's like poetry is one of those things where you tend at school to get a negative impression of it, or you really love it, or whatever. It's like some of the English literature I was forced to read at school put me off English literature for a long time. And similarly with poetry. But anyway.
No, it's so true. Just to pick up on what you're saying, because I think you're making a really important point. We are forced to read books in school, and we're going to like some of those books more than others, and we're forced to read them for a ridiculously long time across a year. And the kind of poetry that's picked, for canonization, or certainly was when I was growing up, and probably when you were growing up as well, Tim, and probably still is the case, I'm not sure. Very often the canon is about producing making sure school kids know about the romantic poets and the various kinds and types of poets. So poems are picked that are emblematical and have become famous and loved by older people, and they're not really suitable for the age groups that are trying to engage with them. And then also interpretation of poetry is so personal that a teacher or a book can really completely flatten your engagement. So I think it's really important for people to understand that poetry is an umbrella genre, and that there, just as there is a kind of fiction book that appeals to everybody, and there is, or fiction story at least, that appeals to everybody, there is probably a type of poetry that even you would love, Tim.
Well, the funny thing is, I really loved, well, I didn't love it, but I really found interesting, like the First World War poetry, which is very peculiar and very specific in its thing. I remember liking that at school, but most of the rest of the poetry was just like whatever. And it's similar to Shakespeare, actually. Shakespeare is fantastic on the stage. If you see Shakespeare like plays done in the original thing, it really works on stage. But if you read Shakespeare, it's like totally different, and it's kind of like reading screenplays. As document, and then saying what a wonderful thing that is. It's like, what's the thing in the format that you're supposed to be in, or and as a voluntary thing. Anyway, that was a tangent.
Couldn't agree more. Shakespeare was never meant to be read the way we read him in school, and poetry definitely benefits, hence the audiobooks, because people, readers are actually asking for them. They're saying, I would love to have an audiobook, I'd love to hear you read it, and all that kind of stuff. And hearing somebody, an actor or the poet, read a poem can really bring it alive in a way that reading it on the page just can't. And I think, again, there's some poems that are page poems and some that are performance poems, and some really need to be read. And then of course there are performance poets who their work written down doesn't really work that well, but it's just mind-blowing when you see it performed. So you're absolutely right, I think.
Let me ask this really quick. I know, Tim, you probably want to move on to his novels.
I'll get to the question eventually.
But I have to ask this because something that's very popular in America is bookstores, libraries, organizations will bring poets in to read their poetry out loud. Do you have that in England?
Yeah.
You have the and have you done that?
Yes, I've done it. Yeah, and I've even done it online. I've done it on Instagram a little bit, but I have read, and it's a fantastically intimate sort of reading experience. Poetry is very different to reading a bit of your novel at a launch or something. Yeah. People who like poetry absolutely love it, and they are such great listeners. They really, really listen and engage with the words and the language and everything. So poetry reading is not usually a stadium-sized event, unless you're Ruby Kaur, in which case it is. She sold out a stadium there a couple of years ago. But for me and poets like me, it's generally a small crowd of people, 50 or less, but a very engaged audience and an incredibly enjoyable and rich experience for you as a writer. You don't normally get that level of attention. So I have done it, and I absolutely love doing it, and I hope to do it live again, because while Zoom or Instagram live is great, it's not the same.
Right. So with all that build up,
I'm being silent, Tim, for you.
The Alliance of Independent Authors is. I'll say this so we don't waste the rest of our quarter of an hour talking about what the Alliance of Independent Authors is. It's the biggest representative body for self-published authors, and probably lots of other things. But I'm really interested in how it got started, because I understand it was like launched it at the London Book Fair, but presumably this wasn't just something that you decided to do after a few drinks with people at the London Book Fair one year to launch the Alliance of Independent Authors. How did you because there is the idea of obviously starting this body, but lots of people will probably have that idea, but you were the person who actually did it. You actually launched the Alliance of Independent Authors. How did that process all happen? How did it at what point did you suddenly think we need a body to represent self-published authors, and how did that process start? How did that evolution begin?
Sure. Well, it really did grow out of my own experience as a self-publishing author. So I began with the poetry pamphlet that I mentioned and went on to do some books. And very quickly, I mean, literally within a matter of weeks, I was looking for an organization to join because I'm a joiner. I like people and I like groups, and I was a member of the Society of Authors, which is the equivalent of your Authors Guild, Christelle, here in the UK. I like organizations and what they do, and I think people are stronger together always. But when I looked for an organization to join, I found the organizations that were there just weren't doing the job that I felt needed to be done. And in fact, some of them were deeply suspect and were giving bum information and were clearly fronts for something else, had a selling agenda behind the scene and all of that. I had worked in media and publishing for 20 odd years, and then I had worked as a literary agent, and I had been an author. I had seen how authors were treated, not just myself, but I ran a writing school, and I had come in touch with lots of talented writers who got contracts from publishers, and the contracts were dire and really, really disgraceful. So I had that's what turned me into an accidental literary agent in Ireland, because just saying, no, don't accept that, look for this, with writers, and which is very kind of time consuming subject, and then actually taking the contract out of writers' hands when they were willing to sign and saying, no, you cannot sign that, give it to me here, let me talk to them. So I had all of that background, and as soon as I self-published myself, as I said, I was skeptical when I started, but as soon as I did it, I saw this changes everything. Authors will never again be where they are or have been up to now, which is, without a choice, basically. Take this, run with it. That's the only choice you have. Self-publishing is not without its problems. It's certainly not without its challenges, but it is another choice that opens everything up. And it was clear that it was very exciting to me that sort of idea of authors being more empowered. And so I did have a very long, dark night where I thought about this, because I was in the middle of a hiatus at this time. There was a lot of things happening. I was moving from Ireland here. I was recovering from cancer. It's treatment really, which was worse than the cancer itself, but and so on. So I was here in London, and I had just started my idea. I'd left the literary agency behind. I'd moved out of journalism and media. My idea was I was going to write fiction, I was going to write poetry, and that was going to be my life kind of thing. But then I really felt the urge to start this organization. And so I did spend a lot of time thinking about it first, talking to my husband, who is my co-director. I mean, I don't do this on my own. The two of us do it very much together. And to everybody else. And just, I was kind of saying to myself, do I really want to do this? I knew exactly what it was going to entail. I had no illusions. I knew it was going to be a huge amount of work and so on. But actually, I did want to do it because, as I said, it just seemed to me to be the biggest thing ever. And to not do it I think I would have regretted it. So, yeah. I did it.
Do you accept authors from around the world? Do you have an international?
Oh gosh, yes, we're very global. We have to be. Self-publishing is global, so we have to be what our members are. We have to reflect their needs. So, I mean, that is one of its challenges, is because, we do have authors from literally everywhere around the place, and most of our members actually are from the US. So we're headquartered in London, but that is the least relevant thing about us, and everybody always calls us a UK-based organisation, which kind of drives me nuts because it's completely irrelevant to what we do and how we do it. Of course, you're tinged by your home place and where you live, but we're always trying, one of the mantras here in ALLi is there's no such place as abroad. We live on the internet, so, and that's really, really core and very, very important to what we do and how we do it.
Yes, so that's covered that question, and now I'm trying to think. What's another question I can ask? I mean, the thing is, I'm coming to it from the fact that I know a lot about self-publishing. I don't generally get around to self-publishing that much, but I do know a lot about it. But what would you say are the three biggest things that new self-published authors get wrong and should be careful about? So if anybody's watching the show and thinking, I wouldn't mind self-publishing some poetry or something, what are the three biggest mistakes that new authors make in self-publishing?
Okay, well, the first thing is they jump in too fast. So they have the idea, I'd like to self-publish, and then they kind of look around and they get some advice or something, and it makes a bit of sense to them, and they decide, okay, I'm going to do this, and they do it, and off they go. And that's fine. It is a way to do it, but it's much better to kind of take a couple of steps back and do a lot more in-depth research. So the second thing I'd say is they don't prepare enough. And they don't plan enough and go into, what do I want to get out of this? What am I doing it for? What do I expect the outcomes to be? What's my definition of success? What's my personal passion here? What's my mission? What am I trying to make happen? Who do I want to reach? All those kinds of things. And the second one is kind of linked to it. I think they don't think enough about where they fall in the publishing ecosystem. So they don't have a sense. They're very connected emotionally to their own work, so tend to overvalue it emotionally and undervalue it commercially. So they become publishers by deciding to self-publish. It's there in the word, but it takes a long time before they actually begin to think like a publisher. So I think there's a lot of kind of preparation work that could be done up front that would make life a lot easier, because I do see a lot of authors hitting a wall after a while. And then the thing is, some people get beyond that and are fine and off they go, but they have to stop. They have to go back to the beginning and think about all these questions that maybe if they ask themselves up front, it will be easier. I definitely think it would, and it will be faster. And then the third thing I think is that there isn't enough cognizance of the fact that this is a business that you've now entered into. As soon as you sell a book, you actually are in business. And what does that mean for you as a person? What are your ideas around that? How do you marry the creative and commercial? How do you bring them all together? So kind of everything I'm saying is that at the beginning, I think it really does pay off to do some deep creative thought and planning in advance, so that you don't. The other thing I see a lot is that authors who rush this way, when somebody says you should do this, and then they're over here the next week doing something else, and they don't have that firm sort of centered sense of what it is they want to achieve and how they define success themselves. So they get blown around a lot, and a lot are working very hard, but not necessarily working on the right things, and going around, wheels spinning quite a bit, a lot of busyness, but not a lot of productivity maybe, or not a lot of rewards, frankly.
Can anyone write?
Anyone can do anything they want to do if they're willing to pay the price. So if you want to become a writer, you can start off. I mean, when I look at my first writings, they are dismal. Writing is a skill that can be improved like any other skill, but it is a skill that takes a long time to be good at it. Even if you start off with a talent, to actually become a consistently good writer in long form, particularly books, is a very high level skill, and high level skills take a lot of time, and they can only be learned by doing. They can't. Nobody else can teach you. People can give you shortcuts and tips and general sort of rules, but nobody can actually teach you to become a good writer. You do that by reading and by writing. So it's like an apprenticeship. It's like any other skill. And I think I see ALLi as kind of a giant hive mind master, that helps the people who are coming along next. It is an apprenticeship in that sense. People come onto the forum and ask questions. Where can I find this? How should I approach that? What happened to you when you did the other? And those kinds of questions. It's great to be able to get an answer to those, but nobody can help you when it comes to the blank page. So not everybody will write. because they won't pay the price. You sit in a room staring at a computer screen or a page, making up words, and it's not the glamorous life that people seem to think it is, which always abuses me enormously. It's you're either made that way or you train yourself to be that way. But there is a price to be paid if you want to be a writer.
Will you give potential writers, your best advice for moving in that direction to actually publishing?
Yeah, the best advice is who's most like the kind of books that you want to publish. What are you bringing? What value are you bringing that isn't there already? So you've got to carve out for yourself in a very crowded world, and a lot of people jumping up and down and looking for attention. You've got to find the place that is unique to you. And that's why I was talking about that kind of going deeper into yourself at the beginning being very helpful. So you've got to really express yourself in your own unique way, but at the same time, be very aware of where you fall in the publishing ecosystem. Who are your comparable authors? What do they do that's the same? What kind of tropes and things do you need to follow in the genre that you're in? But also then, how are you going to be unique and in some way remarkable or exceptional and offer value to the reader? So my number was a very long-winded way of saying, think about your reader and the value that you're bringing to the reader. Stop thinking about yourself and how much you are caught up in the book yourself and start kind of aerating it. One of the best ways of doing that, I think, is to get some beta readers to take a look and give you some feedback. If you're at that stage, if you're ready at that stage, definitely on a first book, the more feedback you can get on that book, the better. In the old days, that happened by sending it out, getting rejected, and if you were lucky, somebody giving you some comments of feedback. But now it's better done through beta reading and editors, hiring good editors.
Right. So normally Christelle asks this question about how can people find out about you, but I'm going to ask it in a different way. How can people find out about Orna Ross? And also, can you do your 1 minute elevator pitch for why people should join the Alliance of Independent Authors, because we're kind of running out of time.
I don't know if I have an elevator pitch. I think people should join ALLi. I don't think everyone should join ALLi, actually. I think it is like every organization, it's for a particular kind of person. And we are for the kind of person who actually wants to be an indie author. So while a one book self-publisher will get all the information that they need, if you're the kind of person who wants to publish a book for your community or for your family or something, that's not quite what we do. Neither are we for the people who are only about publishing on Amazon rapid release, in one genre, that kind of thing. We are for the person who wants to be a working indie author earning their living from their writing. And if that's you, I honestly don't think you could be in a better place, because it's the community that makes it what it is. There are just these incredible writers and publishers who are so generous with their time, and they really, it's just fantastic not to be on your own and to be part of a group of people who are taking it seriously enough to pay the annual fee. It's not hugely expensive, but it does mark out those who are serious about what they're doing and those who are, the huge writing community that is out there on the internet. And the second thing I think is that, we have a campaigning aspect, which is not really done by anybody else. We have a watchdog desk that keeps an eye on self-publishing services. We run campaigns where we try, we talk to service partners from the big ones, Amazon and Ingram Spark, all the way to the smaller freelance people. We have a dedicated literary agent. We give contract advice. I just feel that for a modest annual fee, there's a huge range of services that you get for that. But I think mostly it's the community.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Where can people find me? ornaross.com is pretty easy, and allianceindependentauthors.org.
Okay. And they will be in the show notes, which people can find on stoneandpress.com, or they can scan the QR code down there.
Very
mixed up.
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Orna, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. We're about to sign off. It was a joy and a pleasure to meet you and hear more about Alliance of Independent Authors. Tim has been doing a Twitter chat, I believe, for you, correct? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As it was coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, hashtag Indie Author Chat, which is on Wednesdays at when is it? It's like 8 p.m.
UK time.
Yeah, and that will be noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Anyway, we know it's 9 p.m. European time. So,
which
thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for
being here. Guys. It was fun. Thank you so much.
So nice to meet you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
This is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.
Just cliche shit, you know.